All right, everybody, buckle up because today we are diving headfirst into some seriously wild stuff. You know, that headline making the rounds.
Well, yeah. But what about Taiwan?
That's the one, October Taiwan invasion. Like, whoa, hold the phone. Kind of reminds me, actually, of our last deep dive, remember?
Oh, yeah, where we were talking about all those Chinese netizens riled up about Australia.
Exactly. And people really seem to dig that discussion. So thanks for all the feedback, by the way. But now this new headline drops, and it's a whole other level of intense.
For sure. Talk about a shift in focus.
So this new info, it's from a report on a site called 1945, published on April 5th.
They focus on defense and security stuff, right?
Right on the money. And they're quoting what they call an unnamed intelligence source who claims China's going to make a move to take Taiwan in the next 6 months.
6 months. That's like right around the corner.
I know, right? It makes you want to check your calendar. Like, wait, is it already October?
Definitely puts a whole new spin on those long-term predictions we've been hearing.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to unpack today. What does this all mean for you, the average person trying to make sense of this crazy world? We're going to look at how likely this whole October invasion thing actually is, according to all our sources. Then we'll dig into the different scenarios of how it could actually go down. And lastly, we'll explore what kind of global shockwaves we might feel if things really hit the fan.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. We've got articles from Taiwanese news outlets like New Talk Mirror Media, Eat Today, the United Daily News, even an interview with this expert Matsuda Yasuhiro on VOA. Oh, and a military analysis from Sheng Bao that we found Throughline today, a commentary piece from Storm Media, and to top it all off, we've even got some juicy online discussions from Feng V and this YouTube channel, VO Mark Space.
Wow, that's quite the mix.
It is, and that's the point. We want to hit this from all angles, give you the full picture without, totally frying your brain.
A balanced diet of information.
Exactly. So let's start with the big question. How seriously should we take this October invasion claim?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And the first thing that kind of sets off my alarm bells is that none of the big U.S. news outlets are really backing this up.
You're saying it's just this one 1945 report and that's it?
Pretty much. You haven't seen CNN or the New York Times jumping on board, confirming this October timeline with any solid evidence. And that's kind of suspicious, don't you think?
Yeah, like they're all just sitting there with their arms crossed like, we'll see about that.
Exactly.
And to be fair, we have heard these kind of warnings before, right?
That's for sure.
Like, remember General Minahan's whole thing about 2025 being a potential flashpoint?
Oh, yeah, that was all over the news.
And we even saw that mentioned in some of our background research, but that was more of a general time frame, right? Not like pointing a finger at a specific month.
Right. Minahan was basically saying, hey, keep your eyes peeled. Around 2025, things could get dicey.
But this new report is like, boom, October.
Huge difference. Makes you wonder what they're basing that on.
And then there's the big elephant in the room, or maybe the unnamed source in the room in this case.
Ah, yes, the infamous unnamed intelligence source.
Always makes you raise an eyebrow, doesn't it? It's like your friend telling you some crazy gossip, but refusing to spill the tea on who told them.
Right. You're just left wondering, okay, but where did you hear this?
Exactly. So we have to take that October prediction with a grain of salt, right?
For sure. Intelligence can be helpful, but when you don't know who's talking or what their agenda might be, it's hard to know how much to trust it.
Makes sense. Okay, so we know China's been doing all these military drills around Taiwan. Those flights into Taiwan's ADZ that Mark Space guy on YouTube even had some pretty specific figures for March of this year.
Yeah, that guy's got some detailed intel.
But does all that saber rattling automatically mean invasion time in October?
Well, let's put it this way. That increased military activity from China, it's definitely part of the equation. It's a way for them to show off their muscles and keep the pressure on Taiwan.
Kind of like that guy at the gym who's always grunting and dropping weights.
Exactly. It's intimidation tactics. But there's a big difference between flexing and actually throwing a punch.
Yeah, like you can practice your jabs all day, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to step into the ring.
Right. So while those exercises are definitely cause for concern, they don't automatically translate to an invasion, especially not one with a hard deadline like October.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about Taiwan itself? Are they just sitting ducks here?
Not at all. Our sources tell us they've been busy getting their defenses ready and preparing their citizens for potential trouble.
Good for them.
We've seen reports about them upgrading their military, doing more intense training, even those extended Hong Kong exercises that the VO Mark Space mentioned, and trying to build up their society's ability to withstand pressure. So it sounds like they're taking this threat seriously and getting ready to fight back if they have to.
That's good to hear. They're not just going to roll over.
Nope. They're putting up a fight.
So, okay, the October thing might be a bit shaky, but the tension is real.
Oh, yeah. Definitely real.
So let's play out the what-ifs. What if China does decide to go for it? What are some of the ways our sources say this could actually happen?
Well, the picture that emerges from our sources is a whole spectrum of possibilities. Everything from kind of subtle pressure tactics to a full-blown invasion.
Like a menu of bad options?
Basically. For example, Mirror Media, they outline 8 different ways China could try to assert its control over Taiwan.
8 ways? That's a lot of options.
Right. They start with things like cognitive warfare.
Cognitive warfare. What is that like mind control?
It's more about messing with people's heads, creating division and confusion without actually firing a shot.
So like propaganda and disinformation campaigns.
Exactly. Then you've got gray zone tactics, which are basically those ongoing military incursions we've been talking about, those little provocations designed to wear down Taiwan's defenses over time.
Like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So those are the more subtle approaches?
Right. Then they move on to the more serious stuff like joint military deterrence.
Which means what exactly?
Basically, it's a massive show of force by the Chinese military. Think warships aircraft all deployed near Taiwan, sending a very clear message, don't even think about resisting.
And then there's the blockade, right?
Yeah, the air-sea blockade, that's a big one. Mirror Media highlights how a blockade could cripple Taiwan's economy without necessarily triggering a direct U.S. military response.
So it's like choking them off without actually firing a shot.
Exactly.
Brutal. Okay, what else is on Mirror Media's list of doom?
Well, they go on to describe joint fire strikes, which would basically be raining down missiles on Taiwan. Then you've got decapitation strikes, which are aimed at taking out Taiwan's leaders. And then the grand finale, a full-scale invasion, which would be the all-out option, the one that would almost certainly draw in international forces.
Sounds like the mother of all battles.
For sure. However, Mirror Media emphasizes that the most worrying scenario, in their opinion, is actually seizing Taiwan's offshore islands like Kinmen and Matsu.
Interesting. Why those islands specifically?
Well, they argue that it's a less costly operation for China, but it still carries a huge symbolic weight. Zhang Rongfeng, in the United Daily News article, also stresses how crucial these islands are, bringing up that whole 1996 crisis as an example.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. So taking those islands, it's like a smaller scale victory, but one that sends a big message.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got Mirror Media's 8 scenarios, and then New Talk brought up 3 more scenarios based on an analysis by this U.S. expert Chuck DeVore, right?
Yep.
How do those line up?
Well, DeVore's analysis gives us another angle on this, but there's definitely some overlap. He talks about a gradual blockade, which is similar to Mirror Media's air-sea blockade idea.
Okay, so that one's consistent.
Then he throws in the lightning seizure, and E! Today actually highlighted a report from the UK's Telegraph suggesting this could be a 48-hour blitz.
A 48-hour blitz?
Yeah, the idea is a lightning-fast, decisive strike to capture key targets before the international community can really react effectively.
Wow, like a smash-and-grab operation.
Exactly, like trying to pull off a bank heist before the cops even know what's happening.
And the goal is what? Just to catch everyone off guard?
Right. It's about creating a fait accompli, a done deal, before anyone can intervene.
Sneaky.
And then DeVore's final scenario is a full-scale war, which he calls doomsday.
Doomsday. That sounds cheery.
This would involve a full-on invasion, basically a head-to-head confrontation with the U.S. and allied defenses in the region.
So basically World War III.
Not a pretty picture.
Okay, and then there's the Shang Bao analysis, right?
Right.
They had that more unconventional idea with the civilian ships and special forces.
Oh, yeah, that was really interesting. What stood out there was how they moved away from those traditional invasion tactics.
In what way?
Well, according to the Shang Bao piece that was published via Line Today, they suggested using commercial ships to carry special forces to Taiwan's eastern coast places like Hualien and Taitung.
So sneaking in through the back door, basically.
Exactly. The idea is to get behind Taiwan's main defenses, help guide missile strikes, and try to take out those mobile missile launchers. And at the same time, the regular Navy would be creating distractions on the western coast.
So like a two-pronged attack.
Yeah, a coordinated effort to quickly cripple Taiwan's ability to defend itself deeply and achieve a swift victory.
Clever. It's like using a Trojan horse.
Right. You never see it coming.
What about Storm Media? What was their angle on all this?
Storm Media, they really honed in on the question of what China's actual objectives would be in all of this. Like, what would victory look like for them?
it's not just about conquering territory, right? There's got to be a bigger game plan.
Exactly. And they propose a few possibilities. One, forcing Taiwan to surrender through that air and sea blockade, leading to economic collapse.
So squeezing them till they cry uncle.
Right. Another option they suggest is seizing those offshore islands to create panic and pressure Taiwan into political negotiations.
A show of force to bring them to the table.
And then the last resort, the full-blown invasion, if all else fails.
So they see that as a last resort, not the primary objective.
That's how Storm Media frames it.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got all these different scenarios, and then there's the analysis from Matsuda Yasuhiro, that VOA interview, right?
Yeah, he had some really insightful thoughts on the timing and the strategy of all this.
What did he say?
Well, Matsuda, he's looking at the bigger picture, offering a more long-term and nuanced perspective. He pinpointed 2027 and the early 2030s as key periods of risk.
Interesting. Why those specific timeframes?
He ties it to Xi Jinping's age and his potential ambitions. But here's the kicker. Matsuda actually thinks a full-scale invasion during those years is unlikely.
Really? Why not?
Because in his view, the costs and risks for China would be astronomically high.
So he's saying this whole October scare is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, according to Matsuda, it's not very likely. He believes what Beijing would really prefer is something he calls coercive peaceful unification.
Coercive peaceful unification. That sounds kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
It does, right. But it basically means using the threat of force to scare off the U.S. and pressure Taiwan into surrendering without an actual military attack.
So like a psychological war of attrition.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Matsuda also says that this scenario is pretty unlikely to actually work.
Why is that? What's the catch?
Well, he lays out a few reasons for that to happen. China would have to be overwhelmingly powerful. The U.S. would have to basically become isolationist and completely back off. And Taiwan's leaders would have to be willing to just give up. He even joked that the final result might be Xi Jinping's Chiang Kai-shekization.
Xi Jinping's Chiang Kai-shekization? What does that even mean?
Basically, it means Xi Jinping might end up like Chiang Kai-shek talking a big game about unification, but never actually achieving it.
Ah, I see, like all bark and no bite.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got all these different scenarios ranging from subtle pressure to all-out war. But regardless of how it might happen if things do escalate, who are the other players who'd likely get dragged into this mess?
Well, the U.S. is the obvious one.
Because of their whole we've got your back agreement with Taiwan.
Right. The Taiwan Relations Act basically obligates the U.S. to help Taiwan defend itself.
Right.
And that could mean anything from sending weapons to actually getting directly involved militarily. We saw that mentioned as in that VOA interview.
So the U.S. would almost certainly be involved in some capacity. What about Japan?
Japan's security is tied very closely to what happens in the Taiwan Strait just because of their proximity and their alliance with the U.S. Matsuda even said that Taiwan's emergency is Japan's emergency.
So they'd be right there in the thick of it.
Most likely. He even suggests that Japan could be targeted directly.
Whoa. Okay, that's scary. What about other countries in the region?
Well, you've got Australia, South Korea, the Philippines. They could all be impacted because of the regional politics and economic ties. But whether they get directly involved militarily, that's less certain.
Okay, so the whole region would be on edge.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What about globally? What kind of ripple effects would this have on the rest of the world?
Oh, the global impact would be huge. All our sources agree on that. It would be a massive blow to the world economy, especially because of the semiconductor supply chain.
Taiwan makes a lot of those, right?
A lot. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, they produce the vast majority of the world's advanced computer chips. And those chips, they go into everything, our phones, cars, even military equipment.
Wow, so we're talking about a global tech meltdown?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Storm Media, Youytube Mickytolife, they all highlight this. And beyond the economic chaos, you've also got the potential for a new Cold War, a humanitarian crisis, disruptions to global trade and shipping, especially if there's a blockade like ET today mentioned.
So basically the whole world would feel the pain.
Pretty much.
Okay, so to sum this all up, this October timeline seems pretty unlikely, but the potential for something to go down is still there. What's the big takeaway here?
Well, the general consensus among experts, and we see this in Matsuda's analysis, and that U.S. intelligence assessment cited by Youytube Mickytolife, is that a full-scale invasion in the near future, especially this October, is probably not going to happen.
Because it's just too risky for China.
Exactly. The risks and the costs for them are just way too high. That U.S. Director of National Intelligence report even suggests that Beijing would much rather use pressure tactics than go to war, unless Taiwan declares independence or the U.S. does something really provocative.
So they'd rather play it safe unless they're really pushed into a corner.
That seems to be the thinking.
And Mark Space also brought up the possibility that things might not be so stable within China itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which could make pulling off a big operation like an invasion even harder.
Right. All those shakeups in the Chinese military leadership, they raise some serious doubts about whether Xi Jinping actually trusts his commanders enough to carry out such a complex and risky operation.
So, like, internal power struggles could actually be a deterrent?
Potentially, yeah. If you're not even sure your own team is fully on board, that's going to make you think twice about launching a major military operation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so those military drills that China keeps doing around Taiwan, are they losing their impact?
There's a sense, and CM Mark Space, pointed this out, that those repeated exercises might be suffering from a bit of a boy who cried wolf effect.
Like, people are just getting used to them.
Exactly. They might not be as effective as a deterrent anymore.
Okay, so low chance of an invasion this October, but not impossible, and the underlying issues aren't going away.
Right. That's the bottom line.
So what you're saying is stay informed and stay vigilant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if this October timeline is just a blip on the radar, the fundamental tension in the Taiwan Strait and China's long-term goal of unification, they mean that Taiwan and its allies need to keep their eyes wide open and be ready for anything.
This is definitely not something we can just ignore.
Nope, not at all.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, lots of different scenarios, different opinions on how likely they are. But if you had to pick one, what do you think is the single most important factor that will determine whether or not there's a conflict in the Taiwan Strait?
That's a tough one. It's really a delicate balance of several factors. China's internal political and economic situation, how strong and clear the international community is in its support for Taiwan, especially the U.S. and its allies, and then Taiwan's own ability and determination to defend itself. Any big change in any of those areas could really tip the scales.
Yeah, it's like a giant game of chess with all these different pieces moving around.
Exactly.
Well, hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of how complex this issue is without making your head explode. And speaking of checking out cool stuff, our good buddy Micky have a fantastic YouTube channel called Mickytolife. He's got these awesome travel vlogs, really funny whiskey reviews, and some super chill background music. You should totally go check it out. We're big fans.
I'll definitely have to give it a look.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today for this deep dive into the Taiwan Strait situation. It's been a wild ride.
Definitely.
And remember, stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, stay safe.
Words to live by.